Theresa May under fire. The British Prime Minister criticized over her billion-dollar deal with Northern Ireland's Democratic Unionist Party, accused of buying the support of its MPs. Will the deal help or hinder the peace process in Northern Ireland? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Richelle Carey. British Prime Minister Theresa May has struck a controversial deal with Northern Ireland's Democratic Unionist Party. She needs the backing of the DUP's 10 members of parliament after her own Conservative Party failed to gain a majority in a general election earlier this month. The deal will see the DUP support May's minority government on key votes, including Brexit. Of course, that's the UK's exit from the European Union. In exchange, the DUP will receive more than $1 billion in extra funding for Northern Ireland. Not all parties are happy, and some have raised doubts about its impact on the Good Friday Agreement and the issues affecting the power-sharing assembly in Northern Ireland. DUP leader Arlene Foster has welcomed the agreement.
Today, we have reached an agreement with the Conservative Party on support for government in Parliament. This agreement will operate to deliver a stable government in the United Kingdom's national interest at this vital time.
The Sinn Féin leader, Gerry Adams, voiced his concern, saying the deal threatens the Good Friday Agreement.
I note, and it was an important thing, even though it's rhetorical perhaps, that the Tory government and the DUP committed themselves to the Good Friday Agreement and its successors. So the logic of that then, given that they're in abeyance, those issues are in abeyance, is to get them resolved and to implement them.
Let's take a look at the Good Friday Agreement, which put an end to 3 decades of sectarian conflict and violence in Northern Ireland, known as the Troubles. The agreement was reached between the parties in Northern Ireland, along with the British and Irish governments, and signed in April 1998. A power-sharing assembly was established between nationalists and unionists to govern Northern Ireland. But in January of this year, that assembly collapsed and has not been restored. Under the Good Friday Agreement, the British and Irish governments are required to be impartial in negotiations between the parties in Northern Ireland. Let's get the thoughts of our guests now. Joining us in London, Alex Deane, former Chief of Staff to the former British Prime Minister David Cameron. In Belfast, Northern Ireland, Patricia MacBride, a lawyer and political commentator. And in London, also via Skype, John Ryan, a fellow at the London School of Economics. Welcome to all of you. I guess the overarching question before we dig into the nitty-gritty of this is this a good deal? Is this in the best interests of the UK? I'm going to let you go first, Alex.
Absolutely, in my view, it is. We've got to get on with governing. Obviously, I'm a Conservative, and obviously every party would prefer to govern in its own right. No party wants to go into coalition with anyone. But given the numbers that we had at the election, no one would pretend that this is a perfect scenario or a perfect solution. But I think it's the best solution available to the government, and it enables us to get on, A, with forming a government, and B, with the vital process of Brexit on which the clock is ticking. So yes, this is a good thing.
Patricia?
I don't know that it was a good deal, but it was certainly a necessary deal. Theresa May took a gamble when she called the general election. That gamble failed. She came back with a reduced majority, and she had no option but to come to an agreement with the Democratic Unionist Party in order to shore up her own leadership of the Conservative Party and to ensure that we weren't facing into another general election at Westminster. So it was a necessary evil rather than necessarily a good deal.
Necessary evil. John, do you agree with that? What's your take?
I don't think this is in the national interest. I think it's in the Conservative Party's interest to have this deal, to maintain them in power. This could become a real problem over the next 6-12 months. We have to see the effect of this on the Good Friday Agreement. We're going through discussions in Stormont, and we're going to have the Brexit negotiations, and the Irish Republic is actually a friend. And if this looks like it could sour that relationship, that might make our Brexit negotiations much more difficult in the future.
Okay, and actually we're going to come right back to that. But Scottish First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon said this. She said this is a grubby, shameless deal. The Tories have shown that they will stop at nothing to hold on to power, even sacrificing the very basic principles of devolution. Alex, I'm sure that you disagree with that, but does it seem, could someone make the argument that the Tories have put their own best interests above the interests of everybody else of the country?
No, really, I mean, this just demonstrates Nicola Sturgeon is relentlessly negative about everything. You could offer her a cup of tea and she'd find 12 ways to complain about the tea.
Alex.
It just demonstrates for me, I'm serious, because this deal, no one's pretending this deal was perfect, Richelle. In fact, of course, I mean, the Conservatives would rather have had a majority of our own. We failed. We called an election and then we lost our majority. This is not a good situation for the Tory party to be in. We're making the best of the situation that we are in. And this is, as was been already put, I think this was necessary for us to do. So let's just be clear. The DUP is good enough to form government in Northern Ireland. They're good enough to form or help this kind of deal in Westminster. The DUP were reached out to by the Labour Party to do a deal in 2010 when we had an election, in 2015 when we had an election, and now most recently in 2017. So the DUP is a legitimate partner for people in government across the political spectrum and on both sides of the aisle. So this sort of argument from Nicola Sturgeon, I think, is sad. But the last thing I'll say is this. Gordon Brown, when he was Prime Minister, did a deal with Northern Ireland for a similar sort of money, £1.4 billion, to secure DUP votes on a single issue vote. He paid that money to get DUP votes for 42-day detention of suspects without charge. Now, I happen to think that was wrong on civil liberties grounds anyway, but my point is that this sort of money, whilst a lot, was being spent by past governments for single votes. Instead, this is a package that allows us to continue governing for a parliament up to 5 years. Surely that's in the national interest.
So, John, how about that? Are some of these criticisms really more about posturing than about the reality? And Patricia, I can see you want to get in on that too. I'll let you get in just a moment. But John?
Yeah, I think that obviously Nicola Sturgeon and obviously Plaid Cymru, the Welsh Party, are very upset about this. Probably some of the English regions are very upset about this. I've seen the arguments that have been put back to them about monies going into those particular countries. Of course, this is party political now. There's no question about that. And it is true to say that, you know, that the Labour Party were into some of these grubby deals as well. But I think that when we look at it, and when we look at it further down the line, I think this is going to be complicated because of some of the policies that are put forward by the DUP, which the British electorate will find out more about in the next few months. And I don't think they'll particularly like them on same-sex marriage, on climate change deniers, you know, links to sectarian organisations. Some of the members of the DUP delegation, MPs, have had links. These have been quite widely put forward by different papers from different political perspectives. So I think from that, it's particularly unedifying. It may have been a pragmatic decision by the Conservative Party to avoid another election. But I think there's going to be political point scoring being made, and Nicola Sturgeon is doing that. But I think that there's going to be an education of mainland United Kingdom about who the DUP are and what they stand for.
Patricia, do you agree with that? Do you think that the British electorate as a whole doesn't know what they're getting with the DUP?
Well, I think that there's a couple of issues there to come back to. The DUP does have very conservative, socially conservative policies in respect of human rights issues, in respect of the LGBT community, women's reproductive rights. There are a number of creationists who are in prominent roles within the party. And all of that is something that I think members of the British public are going to have difficulty coming to terms with. But to go back back to Alex's point, it's not a case of saying that the DUP is not fit to be in government in Westminster if it's in government or previously has been in government in Belfast. The DUP does have an electoral mandate, and everyone accepts that. 10 of the 18 members of Parliament for the North of Ireland are members of the DUP, and they have a majority of 1 in terms of the number of members of the Assembly here. So their electoral mandate has to be respected, but it's not about, what you're given. It's about what you do with what you've got. And it's a case of whether or not the Conservative Party can compromise its principles on issues around the human rights matters that I've raised and go into government. The other question then is where this deal takes us. The deal is very much around the DUP supporting the Conservative Party on matters of the budget, on matters of national security, and essentially giving them a blank cheque on Brexit. Now, the DUP is walking into these Brexit discussions not knowing what the government plan is, and with a contradictory attitude in terms of Brexit in the North, saying on one hand that it wants to remove itself from the customs union, but on the other hand that there can't be a hard border on the island of Ireland. Well, you simply can't have it both ways. So this is where the issues are going to come to a head. And also on those non-agreed matters, those vote-by-vote agreements that will have to be made. I can't see this deal lasting, frankly.
Alex, I know you want to get in on that. Let's talk, and we'll come back to the Good Friday Agreement in a moment. First, let's talk. What does this agreement, what impact will this have on Brexit negotiations? Because there still seems to be so much confusion about what the government's plan actually is. And how does this affect the question of the Irish border?
So I don't think it really affects the debate about Brexit per se. The DUP was the party in Northern Ireland that was in favour of leaving the European Union, and on that the Democratic Unionist Party is fully in agreement with the Conservative and Unionist Party, to give us our full name. Both parties wanted to leave the European Union, so I don't think it affects the government's direction of travel. On the question of what happens with Northern Ireland, which is a fair and legitimate question, one can point to comparisons with, for example, Switzerland. When you cross the border into Switzerland from an EU nation, as you do from all sides with that landlocked country, it doesn't much feel like you're crossing a border at all. Or indeed when you cross the border between Sweden and Norway from EU to non-EU, apart from the very occasional spot check on goods, pretty much it's a free-flowing border. So there are easy precedents to point to for reasonable agreements to come to. And furthermore, I think there is a lot of goodwill on both sides. It may not be on other aspects of Brexit, but on this issue, I think there's lots of goodwill on both sides to try to fix the discussion, because no one wants that to be a hard border. That's a good situation to be in when you're trying to reach a solution, when everyone wants to reach the right outcome. And finally, of course, let me say this. We've had a common travel area, an agreement between our nations, the United Kingdom and the Republic of Ireland, for a lot longer than the European Union has existed. Whilst we have had our own troubles, and they are profound, on the question of Northern Ireland and its status and the relationship with the Republic, we are able to negotiate and navigate our own relations and indeed our own travel between our countries. It's a close and a good relationship. This is the only example I know, for example, where nationals of one country, the Irish, vote in another country's elections, in ours. We can come to an agreement on this. We actually don't need the EU to fix that for us.
John, I haven't forgotten about you, but I can tell Patricia wants to get in on this. So, Patricia, your response?
Yeah. I mean, there's no way that the EU 27 are going to say, well, your common travel area is not going to be affected. The EU needs to control its own borders in terms of trade and tariff and the movements of people. And whether they decide that that border is going to be along the 6 counties of the north of Ireland, or that border is going to be between the island of Ireland and the islands of Great Britain, there will have to be some mechanism of control. And there's no way of getting around that. You know, it's foolish to say that we can have a system like Switzerland, and even if we do, you know, I mean, I've been in the situation driving from Germany into Switzerland and being stopped and having my vehicle searched. I've been in the situation most recently of driving from Derry to Dublin and being stopped within 2 miles of the border of the Irish Republic by the Irish police force and customs officials and having my vehicle checked. So this is already happening. It's not going to get any better. It is not going to change. I understand the commitment that was given yesterday by Theresa May in terms of EU citizens' rights post-Brexit within Britain. But this is only what the British are proposing at the minute. It is not what the EU 27 are accepting just yet. And there will need to be a control mechanism if there's a hard Brexit.
John, let me bring you into this conversation, and this is something that we need to devote a significant amount of time to. Both the UK and the Irish governments are supposed to be impartial actors when it comes to the Good Friday Agreement. How at risk is that impartiality now?
Yeah, can I just comment on what just has been said about Brexit? I think it's right to say that, you know, there are a lot of lines in the Brexit agreement that the DUP and the Conservatives could agree with. But I think it is crucial to say that, you know, to have a soft border and be out of a customs union is going to be a contradictory position. And I think we won't be none the wiser about how this is going to work in terms of Brexit and Northern Ireland until we've seen the government's plan. And as we can see, it's been a plan in progress for quite a long time, despite some sort of speeches in Lancaster House and a couple of other documents that were sent out. We're none the wiser. I think the real hard thinking about this and how we move forward and how Northern Ireland can keep a relationship with the Republic of Ireland on trade. This is going to be crucial. And I think it is crucial to say, whatever we're discussing in Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales and England, the United Kingdom and Northern Ireland, I think that we have to take into account what the European Union will accept. So I think that's very much an open-ended question as such. I think that to your question, I think this is a complicating factor that, you know, how we're going to have a situation where the British government is going to be a mediator between basically Sinn Féin and the Democratic Unionist Party. That's going to be very difficult, and there's different ways that you can deal with that. I think we've got the Stormont talks. We're going to have to see how that actually pans out in the next few days. So that will be crucial.
John, if I can jump in there about that, is there added pressure for these parties to figure out how to form a government again? But they have until Thursday.
Yeah, well, I mean, there is the issue that, you know, a significant amount of money is going to come into the Northern Ireland economy, and that's considered, I suppose, a win by most people in Northern Ireland because there's a lot of duress on services in the country. And so there is the argument that, you know, Sinn Féin might come to the table, they might be able to do a deal on the basis then that they can hand out the goodies accordingly. The problem is that we haven't had a government up there since, I think, January, I think it is.
Yes.
And there are some sticking points to do with the leader of the DUP from Sinn Féin's perspective. There's the Irish language issue. There are also some of the issues coming out of the Troubles in terms of unlawful killings. So I think that there's a lot of discussion going on there. So whether we can see it coming together or whether there will be direct rule from London, which would be unfortunate because then we don't know where this will lead, then, you know, that's open to question. I know that the idea that the Northern Ireland Secretary will be they try to insulate him from some of these discussions to try and make him a fair arbiter. But I think that is fanciful thinking to think that the nationalist community would see it in that light.
Alex, how optimistic or not optimistic are you about where these talks will go by Thursday? And does this deal between the DUP and the Tories, does this complicate the situation? Does this help the talks? What do you think?
Oh, I don't really think it affects them materially. I accept that it's affected perceptions in in these discussions. But on the other hand, I think that it's heightened attention towards the talks and elevated them in public attention, which I think can probably be only a good thing. I mean, I don't take a view on some of the questions that were just discussed, like use of the Irish language and so forth, like the use of Wales, which I think the Welsh language in Wales, which I think is up to the Welsh. I think that the use of the Irish language is up to the people of Ireland, North and South. But on the vital question of what happens with the Good Friday Agreement, we've tolerated on both sides of the border many things to try to get towards peace. I mean, here we are. We never thought that the likes of Martin McGuinness and Gerry Adams would be anywhere near government, let alone holding posts like Deputy First Minister. Sinn Féin, of course, the political wing of the IRA, long involvement in terrorism and connections with terrorism. We as peace-abiding people on both sides of the border, and indeed both Republican and Unionist, have tolerated that because we are very keen to get towards peace. I really think that the Democratic Unionist Party entering into a confidence and supply agreement with the Tories to lend them 10 votes when they're required on things like Brexit is anything like as serious as the things we've put up with in the past. And I think that the people of Northern Ireland, and indeed the people of the Republic of Ireland, have shown tolerance, good sense and patience in this process. I think this is another thing which, whilst not frankly completely ideal, will be more than tolerated with people who have peace in their best interests.
Patricia, are you concerned about the peace process now?
Well, I think that you have to be concerned about the impact this deal is having on the ongoing talks process. On the one hand, there is an added impetus to come to an agreement at Stormont, because in the absence of an agreement, then any administration of the North will be done from Westminster by direct rule, meaning that locally elected members of the Assembly will have no say in how budgets are allocated or how their departments are run, and that's hugely concerning. But on the other hand, you know, rushing into an agreement purely in order to get your hands on the money is not something that I think any of the parties here are going to be keen to do. The bigger issues that are there are very real issues, and it's not a matter, you know, Alex is right, it's not a matter of having to agree this because of what's happening in Westminster. It's about having to agree this because of the reason that the institutions of the Assembly collapsed in the first place, and that was out of a lack of respect for people's electoral mandate, for people's identity, culture, heritage, tradition, for people's rights. Martin McGuinness collapsed the Assembly because of issues around the Irish language. He collapsed the Assembly because of issues around the Renewable Heating Incentive Scheme, which was a funding programme that was administered by the leader of the DUP's department. Arlene Foster's government department administered a scheme which has put the Assembly in the red to the tune of £470 million. So
Patricia,
those are the issues that still have to be tackled.
Do you see
the
Arlene,
outstanding agreements?
Do you see Arlene Foster as a real obstacle in this?
I think the bigger obstacle in the talks process in Stormont at the minute is agreement on the outstanding implementation of matters, and those are issues like the Irish Language Act. Those are issues around legacy of the conflict and dealing with victims and survivors of the conflict in a fair manner, in a respectful manner, in a way that hasn't been done to date. And they're around creating a shared future, a term that almost that came into fashion in the north of Ireland and then went out of fashion again. But that's where we've fallen down, is on implementation of the agreements that have been made to date. And that's where the focus is now. It's not on the DUP deal. It's not on the funding that's coming in from Westminster, because frankly, I don't believe that there's an awful lot of new money there, or money that wouldn't have otherwise been available to the Assembly in the deal that was signed yesterday.
All right. Patricia, you will have, that'll be our last word. Thank you all for this this conversation. I'm sure we'll be revisiting it again very soon. Thank you all to Alex Deane, Patricia MacBride, and John Ryan. And thank you for joining us as well. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Richelle, Carey, and the entire team, bye for now.